Welcome back. The academic year is in doubt after Wits University postponed a planned General Assembly today, and other universities say that lectures remain suspended due to the fees must fall protests. The main call is for free education now. Several government officials have suggested that's simply not viable when South Africa's debt levels are rising and there's a lack of economic growth. Well, the economics of fees must fall is something that KPMG has looked at, and we're now joined by Chief Economist Lullu Krugel. Great to have you with us.
Thank you,
Lullu. So this is hard to unpack. Firstly, it seems like you are expecting the Finance Minister in his mini budget to say there will be no fee increments for the majority of students. Is that correct?
Yes. So if we look at the announcement that was made, we expect that about 80% of students would be exempt of fee increases, and that's everybody that coming from families that earn less than 600,000 a year. It would be interesting for I think how they're going to handle it and how they're going to figure it out and so on.
Because that's about 2.5 billion rand.
That's right.
Is that readily available just to do this step? Then we'll talk about free education.
No, they will have to go and find it in a few other places. In the beginning of the year, we heard that the tax shortfall this year would be in the region of about 14 billion.
Sure.
So they made some changes to the personal income tax, allowed some bracket creep and so on, but we have not been able to make that up. And as you say, the economy has not been growing.
Okay, so already things are tight,
Yes.
and then there's this call for free education, which I understand could cost up to 70 billion. What sort of figures, ballpark, are you thinking?
That's right. Let's say if we take one-on-one what is currently coming from government in terms of funding and perhaps other sources of income towards tertiary education, it should be about in the region of about 70 billion, and it's a big chunk of the budget.
Sure. So you've looked at a few countries that do have free education, but the question is, do we have the same luxury? Just tell me off the top of your head about some of those countries, what they do, how do they do it?
If we look at some of the Nordic countries, Sweden, Norway and so on, that have free education, obviously they have very low unemployment levels, a broad tax base and so on. And if we look at more developing countries, it's similar to South Africa, for example, Turkey. It's something that they phased in over a period of time. So they eventually got to that. It wasn't an immediate step to say, we're going to do that. So I think we can take some lessons from there and look at, it's difficult for us to compare ourselves, let's say, to a Sweden and so on. I mean, if you look at our average income per capita, if you compare it to the group of countries that includes some countries like Turkey, etc., we're about a quarter of their per capita income. So it's just not affordable for us.
Let's look at those Nordic countries, because Denmark, Finland, Sweden, you said all have free education.
Yes.
And I love the idea of what these countries do, where there's a safety net, you have a lot of support for the poor, anyone who needs healthcare, education, but you have a high tax rate. The rich are putting in.
Yes.
But you're sort of saying we can't push our own tax rate up any further. Are we already up there and comparable?
So if you compare the average tax rate in South Africa to the average of those countries, if you look at personal income tax, yes, we are already comparable.
Sure.
And I think the challenge is the tax base in South Africa. But it is definitely a tricky situation, as you say. It's if you look at what is happening in that country, you almost feel like it's a chicken and egg, because it's probably one of the best ways for South Africa for South Africans to get out of poverty, to get into a job, for South Africa to grow, is to provide our youngsters with education. So it's over the short term, if you look at the budget, we can almost say, or we can say with certainty, we actually can't afford it. But over the longer run, you almost want to ask yourself the question, can we afford not to?
So we need a bigger tax base to afford education, but that's what will get us the bigger tax base.
Yeah,
basically.
It's a bit of a chicken and egg, but I think there are some ideas that we can take from some of those countries about phasing it in over time.
All right, so would you say 70 billion, basically impossible, even if we decided this was a big priority for this country right now?
I don't think it's impossible, but it probably
Something
won't
would have
be,
to give.
Yeah, it probably won't be able. We won't be able to do it in 1 year. I think it won't be prudent to do it. If you look at where we're going to take it from, so from somewhere we'll have to take that money, and ideally you don't want to take it from other economic assets, so like investment in infrastructure, because we need that. And obviously, social spending, social grants and so on has been growing, and it's something that we can't just say to, we're taking that away. So we'll have to look at a couple of solutions and phase it in over time. If you look at Turkey, for example, by the time that they got to that point where they said, okay, education is now free, they've absorbed it little by little by little by little every year until they got to a point where it was, I won't say a painless process, but it wasn't so severe and so immediate.
So the students possibly in the end are going to have to be patient because we just don't have that fat available right now.
It's true, but I think it's important that there should be a plan. There should be a very definite plan from government to say, this is how we're going to approach it, this is what we're going to do. I know that there's a commission that's currently looking into it. I think there's some expectations that we will hear something around November. But at the moment, we're just moving from one year to the next, appeasing the students and not necessarily addressing the challenges. Yeah.
Tell me more about the countries. You've mentioned Turkey, which is interesting that they have it, and they are very comparable.
Yes.
And in a lot of economic pain at the moment, I think. But you say in some countries, I think there was a disconnect between education and job creation. So they're providing free education. Does that mean they're not necessarily getting it right, though?
So in South Africa, we've seen, if we look at the World Economic Forum report that was done in the beginning of the year, they looked at 15 countries to say how prepared are we for the fourth industrial revolution. And South Africa, and I think France and Italy were the 3 countries out of that 15 that the WEF said you're not going to see job growth in the fourth industrial revolution. And the main reason for that was the disconnect between what the market needed and what the education system is offering. And one of the things that company CEOs came up with is to say that we don't feel that we're working closely enough with universities to make sure that we get students in the work market at the end of the day that is employable. So there are some challenges that we need to, in terms of quality and meeting what the market needs. But whichever way you cut it, if you look at the unemployment numbers in South Africa, your chances of getting a job if you have tertiary education is just way better. You're looking at 7% unemployment undergrads, which is something that we ideally don't want to see in an economy where there's a skill shortage, versus 35% for people that don't have further education.
The final question, say this pressure becomes immense. Say we decide to blow 70 billion. Well, we'll put it towards free education. So, and that's just a guess. What does that mean for our credit rating, things like that? Just explain how tight things are right now.
So the debt levels, unfortunately, have increased from about 27-28% in 2008-9 to close to 50% of GDP now. And if you take the interest payments out of the budget, we're actually in a budget surplus. So I wish we can turn back the clock, because that interest payments would probably have been almost
that's just
enough.
Interest on the debt that
That's
we've
right,
accumulated.
yes. It has helped us, that debt, during a time when the economy was slowing down, during the global financial crisis. We were still able to invest. We know that over a 3-year period, we've invested almost 900 billion in infrastructure. But we're at a point now where we've been managing to bring that down, and that has appeased the S&Ps and the Moody's of the world. But we need growth on the back of that to make sure that we can still manage that to get the debt levels down to the 3% that we're looking at.
All right, well, hope these sides, that there is that patience to wait. I really do. Otherwise, we're not going to have university for a while. I want to ask you one more question. While we have you, you have actually looked at what students are paying right now. And I think it is worth mentioning that objectively it has become more expensive. So just explain what you are seeing.
So we've seen that tertiary education costs increase by almost double the normal inflation cost. It's well above the normal inflation. And over the, I think, last 5 years, it's almost an 80% increase. And there's mainly two reasons for it. It's a lot. It's a lot. And if you are the majority or the average household in South Africa, which earns about 160,000, I have no idea how you can afford to send a child to university. The main reasons for that is, to some extent, a lot of our textbooks are imported. We've seen what happened to the exchange rate. A lot of the lab equipment and so on also imported, so that has increased. And then universities have said that they've seen, while government's contribution contribution to their funding has remained more or less at 40% of the total. They got the rest from private sector endowments and also from consulting work, and that, interestingly enough, has dropped quite significantly from about 33% to about 27% of their income, and they have to get that from somewhere.
Also linked to economic growth. So
Exactly.
again, it's just everything is linked.
Yeah.
And both sides have a good argument. Thank you for explaining the economics. Of fees must fall. Lullu Krugel from KPMG.